Remember and Do Not Go Gentle, and looking at how we could compare the form and structure of both poems, which would be one of the first things that you want to do if you're comparing these poems within an essay. Do Not Go Gentle, then. The main thing that you need to say is that its form is a villanelle. Now, there are very tight, strict rules in terms of how to write a villanelle. So it needs to be 19 lines long. There are 5 tercets. So a tercet is just a 3-line stanza, and then a quatrain. And it has to follow a strict rhyme scheme as well. So if you look at it, it goes A, B, A, and you get that 5 times for those tercets. And then at the end, it's A, B, A, A. In addition to that, if you look at the first and the last line of the first stanza, so if you look at Do Not Go Gentle into that good night, and then Rage, rage against the dying of the light, you'll see that that's repeated at certain points through the poem. So you'll see that that first line, Do Not Go Gentle, you get that at the end of stanza 2 and then of stanza 4. And then that last line of the first stanza, Rage, rage against the dying of the light, you get that at the end of stanza 3 and then at the end of stanza 5. And then both of those lines, those first and third lines of the first stanza, they're repeated at the end as a kind of sort of rhyming couplet at the end of the poem. Now you could think, okay, why then has Dylan Thomas chosen to use that form? Well, one of the things could be that it ties in with the kind of the tone and the kind of feel and the message of the poem in lots of ways. So if you look at those lines, he's talking about don't go into the night, don't give in to the night, rage against the dying of the light. He's constantly using this light and dark imagery, isn't he, within those 2 lines. And therefore it repeats this kind of forceful message of defiance over and over and over again within the poem. Don't give in to death. Don't just submit and lie down and let it claim you. Live your life to the full while you can. Make the most of every opportunity. You know, it's that really forceful message that he's trying to get across throughout the whole poem. And by repeating those lines, it repeats that message over and over again, doesn't it? The other thing that you could argue is that maybe it leads the poet to repeat the message for different types of people. So if you look at each stanza, it talks about wise men, doesn't it? Then good men, then wild men, then grave men, and then, of course, he addresses his father. And if you think about it, the repetition of the lines almost encourages that process of dealing with different types of people. And one of the things he's trying to do through that is emphasize the universality of the message. So we're all going to die. This applies to everyone, whether you're good and bad, whether you're wild or tame, whether you're serious or not, whoever you are, we're all going to die. And so this message is for all of us. And so by repeating the same message over and over again, but for different types of people, that emphasizes the universality of it. It's for everyone. The other thing that you could say, you could talk about the iambic meter. So you could talk about that it goes unstressed, stressed, unstressed, stressed. So it goes, do not go gentle into that good night. Okay. Most of the way through. There are some exceptions, and the most obvious exception is with that line, rage, rage. So if you look at that, you've then got what you call a spondee, which is these 2 stressed syllables in a row. In addition, because it's the same word repeated, you can call it epizeuxis. So that's just a posh term for the idea of repeating the same word twice in a row like that. So he uses this spondee, which is also an example of epizeuxis, repeatedly throughout the poem. So it's rage, rage. And those 2 stressed syllables in a row, what they do is they create that sense of defiance, it's that forcefulness, it's that determination, that passion that really comes across in those 2 words, doesn't it? There are also a lot of end-stopped lines. Now, that's the opposite of enjambment. Okay, so enjambment is when it kind of the sentence flows on from one line to another and there's hardly any punctuation marks. End-stopped lines are when you get those commas and semicolons and particularly full stops at the ends of lines. Look at the first stanza. You can see you've got a comma, then a semicolon, then a full stop. And there are lots of end-stopped lines here. And maybe this makes it quite forceful and firm and confident in terms of the advice that's being given. The flip side of all this is that you could say that the repetition of those same lines over and over again, do not go gentle and rage, rage, maybe it could make it come across as quite anxious, quite obsessive, quite, it's a lack of confidence, a fear of death. That leads someone to constantly say the same thing over and over again like that. So is it confident, or actually does it reveal insecurities, the sort of the form and structure here? Remember then, it's a Petrarchan sonnet, which means you've got these 8 lines and then 6 lines, an octave and then a sestet. The first thing you could say is that it's a sonnet, and sonnets are often about love. So it's about someone who loves and wants to be loved and to be loved after death. In a Petrarchan sonnet, you normally get a volta, which is like a turning point. And if you look at, remember you've got on line 9, you've got that bit where it says, yet, if you should forget me a while. And that's the volta here, where the focus, I think, seems to shift from a focus on herself and how she wants to be remembered, to a focus on others and how that whole process is going to make the other person feel. A sestet in a Petrarchan sonnet often answers a problem that was presented in the octave. And so maybe in the first 8 lines, she kind of recognises, this isn't going to work, this is just going to create misery. And then the last 6 lines, the sestet, maybe offers the solution to the problem that, maybe you should remember and smile, and through that process, maybe I'll live on in your memories of me. Do you see what I mean? The rhyme scheme, you've got this rhyme scheme which is ABBA, ABBA, CDD, ECE. One of the things that you could say about this is that, can you look, it starts off at A and then comes back to A, starts off at A and then comes back to A, starts off at C and then there's a C later, and then there's an E and then it's back to an E. There's a kind of cyclic structure maybe to the rhyme scheme, which suggests that, we start off with life and then we move towards death because it's inevitable, we're all going to die. But then maybe we can come back to a kind of life after death in the form of living on in someone's memories. The word remember itself is repeated, isn't it, in the poem as a kind of refrain, and maybe that emphasises the need that the narrator feels to be remembered. It's iambic pentameter and quite tightly structured in terms of the iambic pentameter in this poem, maybe suggesting that she's trying to contain quite difficult thoughts and ideas, and struggling to do that. And so there are moments when the iambic structure meter is broken. Look, for instance, at the beginnings of line 7 and line 13, where you get that first foot is inverted. So instead of going unstressed, stressed, it's the other way round. Okay, and perhaps that inversion of the first foot, moving it the other way round, so it's not iambic, perhaps that reveals the kind of passion and discomfort that she feels, because they're quite difficult things to think about. The irregularity of the rhyme scheme at the end, in that final sestet, that C, D, D, E, C, E, it's not quite as regular as you might expect, is it? Perhaps that again reveals the discomfort too. So what you need to do now is look back at what we said about form and structure in both poems, and then think, okay, I'm going to need to write about all these points, but at some point during this section of the essay, I'm going to need to try and make some links. So I've got to show that I'm comparing and contrasting. I'm just going to ask you some questions here, and you could think about where and how you could make these links. Where do both poems break from the meter, from the iambic meter, that didum, 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 that unstressed, stressed meter? Where do they break from that and do something different? And how does that reveal a kind of strength of emotion at that point? It could be a passion or a discomfort or a defiance or whatever. How do both poems use emotion? How do they both use emotion within the poem, and how can you relate that to the form and the structure? And why is a villanelle a suitable form for Do Not Go Gentle Into That Good Night? And why is a Petrarchan sonnet a suitable form for Remember? Okay, and I think if you look back at what you've said about both poems and then think, okay, where can I make just 2 or 3 links to show the examiner that I'm making those comparisons and contrasts, then you'll be able to do that.